Have you ever heard a story so heartbreaking that it makes you wonder how such a terrible thing could happen in a place that seems so ordinary and calm? The tragedy we are about to talk about is just that kind of story. It centers on a young girl named Madeline Soto, who was only 13 years old when her life was taken away far too soon. She lived in Kissimmee, Florida, which is not too far from the tourist attractions that people visit when they want to have fun with family or friends. Yet, behind the bright lights of those famous places, there was a sad event that shook everyone who heard about it. It is painful to think about someone so young, so full of promise, being hurt in such a terrible way. But sharing this story is important, because it reminds us that tragedy can strike anywhere, and it often reminds us how precious and fragile life can be. Even though it is difficult to talk about, I hope that by learning what happened to Madeline, we can keep her memory alive and keep hoping for a day when things like this no longer happen to anyone. Before we begin, I would like to ask you all to kindly like this video and subscribe to the channel. It might seem like a small thing, but it truly helps a lot. Doing research and piecing together everything that happened to create a clear picture takes a lot of time and hard work, and your support makes it possible for us to continue sharing stories like this. Thank you for being here and for taking a moment to support the channel, so we can keep bringing you thoughtful accounts of real events and the lessons we can learn from them. Now, let's talk about what happened to Madeline in a way that feels like we are just having a conversation about this painful situation. Madeline was 13 years old, right at that age where life is both exciting and scary, with all the new things you experience in middle school and the friendships you form. She lived with her mother in Kissimmee, and her mother's boyfriend at the time was a man named Stephen Stearns. Before anything seemed wrong, Madeline was just like many other kids her age. She went to school, had her classes, and did the typical things a middle school girl does. Teachers remember her as someone who was usually polite, maybe a bit shy at times, but still trying to figure out who she was in the world. Her friends recall that she sometimes struggled with certain subjects, but then again, which middle schooler doesn't? She liked to draw pictures of things she imagined, and she would sometimes daydream in class about traveling or doing something fun on the weekends. No one had any idea that her story would soon take such a dark turn. On February 26, 2024, Madeline did not show up at her middle school as she was supposed to. At first, the school staff might have thought she was just sick at home. Kids stay home with colds or minor illnesses all the time, so no one panicked right away. But when the day ended and there was still no word, the situation grew more concerning. People started asking her friends if they had seen her in the neighborhood or on social media, but no one had. The school contacted her family to check on her. Her mother discovered that Madeline was not where she was expected to be, and that was the moment when alarm bells started ringing. There was no clear answer as to why she had not arrived at school, and if you have ever been around a parent who is worried about a missing child, you know that feeling of dread and panic is like a huge weight pressing down on your heart. Her mother reported her missing, hoping that maybe she was just lost or stuck somewhere. But something about this felt odd from the beginning. The local authorities in Kissimmee and the Orange County Sheriff's Office got involved pretty quickly. They put out a notice on February 27th, asking the public if anyone had seen Madeline or had any information about where she might be. People sometimes slip away or run away, especially teenagers who might be upset about school or something else at home. But that scenario did not quite fit with what people knew of Madeline. She had not given any hint that she would run away. She had not packed any bags that anyone noticed, and her closest friends had not heard her talking about leaving. Plus, she was only 13, which made the possibility of her being on her own somewhere seem unlikely. The worry grew among law enforcement that they were not looking at a simple runaway situation, but something that could be much worse. As time passed, a more thorough search began on February 28th, with officers spreading out in different areas to look for any sign of Madeline. They checked places she might go, parks where she might hang out with friends, any local stores she might visit, or homes of relatives or close family friends. Each time, they came up empty. That sense of growing fear around the community was very real, because when a young person goes missing, every adult starts to imagine how terrible it would be if it was their own child or student. In neighborhoods across Kissimmee, the news began to spread, and people started talking about what they could do to help. Some organized searches of their own, looking through wooded areas or open fields, trying to see if they could find any clue. Others printed out flyers with Madeline's picture and posted them at community centers or bus stops. There is a feeling of deep sadness and urgency when everyone is involved in looking for a missing child, because you want to hope for the best, but you're aware that time is so important in these cases. The more hours that pass, the more you fear something truly bad might have happened. Sure enough, on March 1st, 2024, Madeline's body was found in a wooded area. That news sent a shockwave through everyone who had been following her disappearance. To hear that a missing child was discovered no longer alive is a heartbreak that almost cannot be described. In that moment, people who had never met her personally felt a deep sorrow and anger. Parents wept at the thought of it. Students at her school were overcome by grief, with counselors brought in to talk to anyone struggling with the sadness and fear that comes when a fellow student never comes back to class. The police then handed over the investigation to the Kissimmee Police Department because now it was officially a homicide case. Madeline's body showed signs that she had been the victim of violence, and later on, an official report released in August confirmed that she died from strangulation. The fact that this was not some accident or random mishap, but an act of deliberate violence made it even more chilling. Naturally, the authorities' attention turned to the people who were close to Madeline. Whenever something like this happens, investigators look closely at relatives, close friends, and especially the adults in the child's household. That is when the focus fell on her mother's boyfriend, Stefan. While nobody immediately jumps to accuse someone in such a delicate position, there are questions that must be answered. Who last saw her alive? Who might have had a motive or opportunity to do something harmful? People who knew Stefan said they were not too sure about him. Some described him as polite in public, but a bit quiet or standoffish. Others said that they had a weird feeling about him, but nothing concrete. It is often the case that people only notice certain red flags in hindsight. In any event, the police began looking carefully at what Stefan was doing around the time Madeline disappeared. The more they looked, the more troubling things they found. Video evidence surfaced that showed Stefan throwing items into a dumpster on February 26th, the very day Madeline went missing. Investigators retrieved these items from the dumpster, and among them were Madeline's backpack and her school-issued laptop. Right away, that was a major warning sign. Why would a young girl's belongings end up in a dumpster on the same day she vanished? And why would Stefan be the one tossing them out? He also did something suspicious with his phone by resetting it to factory settings that same day. It seemed like he was trying to remove data or hide something. Investigators received Stefan's consent to search his phone on February 28th, before Madeline's body was discovered, but after the missing person reports had become more serious. That phone search apparently led them to discover deeply disturbing material. On February 29th, they found pictures and videos indicating that Stefan had been molesting Madeline before she was killed. These images were on his phone and also on a linked Google Drive account. It was a shocking and horrifying discovery that left officers, family members, and the community outraged and sickened. It's bad enough to lose a child, but to find out she may have been harmed in that way by someone who was supposed to be in a position of trust is almost unbearable. Once this information came out, Stefan claimed that the evidence should be thrown out of court because the police did not have an official search warrant when they went through his phone. He had agreed to the search, but he later tried to argue that the evidence was not obtained properly. While that might be something lawyers argue about from a legal standpoint, it did not change how the community felt about him. By that time, many saw him as the main suspect, and the details of what had happened to Madeline were so grim that it sparked a lot of anger and calls for justice. The authorities formally charged Stefan with first-degree murder, which in Florida can come with the possibility of the death penalty. Indeed, on June 10th, The Ninth Judicial Circuit Attorney's Office announced they would seek the death penalty. Stefan's attorney tried to argue that the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment, pointing to certain constitutional amendments. But in a case involving the murder of a child and evidence of terrible abuse, it was very clear that prosecutors intended to push for the harshest punishment possible. When the media caught wind of the story, it became a big topic of discussion in the local news. Stories about missing children always strike a chord with the public, and the fact that Madeline was so young made it even more heartbreaking. There were pictures of her on television, smiling in that carefree way that kids do. Her friends were interviewed, tearfully explaining that she had recently talked about wanting to join some after-school clubs or maybe get involved in a sports team. The pictures made it even harder to accept that she would never get the chance to grow up, go to high school, or do any of the normal things teenagers dream of doing. People began to fill social media with posts expressing sadness and outrage, using hashtags to talk about her story and demand justice. Candlelight vigils were held in her honor, with local pastors and community leaders speaking to people holding candles and pictures of Madeline, wanting to show her family that they were not alone in their grief. Law enforcement faced a lot of questions about the timeline of events. People wondered if more could have been done to protect Madeline or to catch Stefan sooner. But from the available information, it looks like once the alarms were raised that she was missing, the investigation moved quickly. Still, whenever a child is harmed, the community tends to wonder if there were warning signs that somebody missed. Neighbors or teachers might think back on small incidents that they brushed aside and now regret not mentioning to the authorities. This is not to say that anyone else is to blame, but it shows how people struggle with guilt and sorrow, wishing they could have changed things. The emotional toll on Madeline's mother was unimaginable. She had to deal not just with the death of her child, but also the knowledge that her own boyfriend was the primary suspect. The sense of betrayal, guilt, and heartbreak can only be guessed at by those looking from the outside. People in the community reached out to offer support, offering to help pay for funeral costs or to organize memorials. Even students from Madeline's middle school tried to do small acts of remembrance, like dedicating a space on the school campus to her or writing messages of kindness that they shared online in her memory. However, the mixture of anger and sadness also created tension. Some felt an urge to lash out at Stefan if he ever showed his face in public, and the emotional charge surrounding the case was so powerful that local authorities had to make sure no one tried to take matters into their own hands. It was a time of heartbreak, and confusion, and even though the legal process was beginning, the emotional process for the community and the family was far from over. No trial of this nature is simple or quick, especially when it involves the possibility of the death penalty. Stefan's defense team started to prepare arguments that the death penalty is unconstitutional for various reasons, like that it violates the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment, or that it goes against certain Supreme Court rulings. Florida is known to be one of the states where prosecutors do not shy away from seeking capital punishment in especially severe cases, and a case involving the murder of a child combined with sexual abuse is considered among the most serious. While the legal process was moving forward, the community continued to mourn and wonder how the justice system would handle this. Local news outlets covered the initial court appearances, sometimes showing Stefan being escorted in handcuffs or wearing a standard jail jumpsuit. He did not speak much in these brief appearances, only responding to the judge when asked if he understood the charges. Each time his face was on screen, people were reminded of the horrors that Madeline might have faced, and it fueled more discussions about how to protect children from such dangers. It also led to some calls for educational programs that teach both parents and children how to spot signs of grooming or inappropriate behavior by adults in the household. There were discussions about whether teachers and counselors should be trained more deeply to see if a child is in trouble at home. While there is only so much training can do, some people felt that maybe if someone had noticed warning signs earlier, Madeline could have been saved. After Madeline was laid to rest, her funeral was attended by many people from the community, including classmates, teachers, and even total strangers who just wanted to pay respects. Flowers, cards, and stuffed animals were placed near her memorial, and people wrote messages of love and support for her grieving mother. The service was emotional, with everyone struggling to accept that a child's life had ended in such a cruel way. Some older friends and relatives shared memories of Madeline as a baby, a toddler, remembering how she first learned to walk and talk, and how she was always full of curiosity. Hearing those stories made it even more painful to realize how much of her life was cut short. The mother's pain was unimaginable, and many people wondered how she would ever recover, or how she would handle the ongoing legal proceedings against Stefan. She asked for privacy after the funeral, speaking briefly to a reporter about wanting Madeline to be remembered as a kind-hearted girl who deserved a chance to grow up. It was heartbreaking to see her try to find the words when no words could truly describe the depth of her loss. Over the next few months, the legal process continued to move forward. The prosecutor's office stated they were gathering all the evidence needed to push for a conviction of first-degree murder. Meanwhile, Stefan's attorney worked on his defense. The question of whether the evidence gathered from his phone would be admitted was a significant legal matter, and there were preliminary hearings where each side argued about how the phone search was conducted. The defense insisted that the images and videos had been obtained without a proper warrant, while the prosecution argued that Stefan's consent was enough and that probable cause justified looking deeper into his Google Drive. Some people following the case worried that a technicality might exclude the most damning evidence. Although even without that material, there were still many suspicious facts pointing toward Stefan, such as him throwing away Madeline's backpack and laptop, factory resetting his phone, and lying about what he was doing on the day she disappeared. Friends of Madeline were also asked to provide any information they might have, though it seemed that none of them knew she was in danger. This is part of what makes a tragedy like this so painful. The possibility that a child might be suffering in silence and not know how to ask for help. Some of her classmates expressed regret, wondering if they missed signs that Madeline was afraid of her mother's boyfriend. Others said she was private and did not share much about her home life. A few glimpses into her texts or social media posts might have hinted that she sometimes felt uneasy around Stefan, but nothing was explicit enough for anyone to guess she was in immediate danger. The case sparked conversations about how to talk to children in health classes and counseling sessions, making sure they know how to speak up if someone in their household makes them feel scared or uncomfortable. As the community reeled from the loss, local leaders began to discuss possible changes or improvements that might help prevent similar tragedies. Some suggested more frequent check-ins by social workers when a child's living situation changes, or when a new adult moves into a home. Others spoke about stronger background checks for individuals who will be living with minors, though questions about privacy and how these checks should be handled were raised. Sometimes these ideas turned political, with different viewpoints on how to balance freedom with the need to protect children. No law or policy can guarantee that a tragedy like Madeline's will never happen again, but many people believe it is worth exploring any steps that could lower the risk. It is not just local government or law enforcement who react. Parents start having deeper conversations with their kids, reminding them to speak up if they ever feel uncomfortable, and letting them know that no adult has the right to hurt them. Teachers and counselors become more observant, watching for signs of fear or sadness that do not have an obvious explanation. These small changes might not fix everything, but they can be the difference between catching a problem early or missing it entirely. The court case against Stefan moved slowly, as capital cases often do. Delays and motions came up, with the defense team challenging parts of the process. The prosecution stayed firm in seeking the death penalty, given the severity of the crime. Many in the community felt this was justified, considering the evidence of molestation and the murder of a child. Others argued that the death penalty is never the right answer, but that debate has been around for a long time and tends to rise up whenever a particularly disturbing case emerges. Stefan's background also came into question. Some reporters found minor offenses in his past, but nothing hinting at violence against children. People who knew him said he could be distant or moody, and that he sometimes made them uneasy without providing a clear reason. It seemed nobody had solid proof of wrongdoing until it was too late. This pattern, where a person's dark intentions stay hidden until a terrible act is committed, only added to the shock. Meanwhile, Madeline's classmates did their best to move forward. Some schools held remembrance events or allowed students to write notes to Madeline's mother if they wished. Teachers found it hard to concentrate on regular lessons, haunted by the thought that they would never see her grow up. In the broader community, heartbreak and anger led to organized gatherings aimed at educating people about child abuse, urging neighbors to step in if they suspect a problem. The argument was that speaking up and being wrong is better than being silent and missing a chance to save a life. Though these efforts could not bring Madeline back, they were done with the hope of protecting others. As the case continued, the evidence from Stefan's phone remained a focal point. Experts suggested that if the court deemed it admissible, it would likely ensure a strong case for the prosecution. The phone reset and the dumping of Madeline's items painted a picture of someone trying to hide evidence. Her cause of death, strangulation, pointed to direct violence that needed proximity and intent. The case was daunting for the defense to refute, but they still had to try. Public opinion ran high, and some worried that Stefan would not get an impartial jury because of how widely the story was covered. The defense might have asked to move the trial, but the court would consider whether a fair panel could be selected locally. Families of Madeline's schoolmates watched closely, still trying to process the idea that something so terrible could happen in their community. Eventually, the trial would involve witnesses, forensics experts, and possibly the showing of disturbing images or videos. If a guilty verdict came, there would be a separate phase to decide on the sentence. The defense could argue mitigating factors, perhaps claiming Stefan was under mental stress or had a rough upbringing. But it is hard to imagine a jury having much sympathy in a case this severe. The prosecution would argue for the death penalty, especially because Madeline was so young and the crime involved sexual abuse. Family members might speak in court about Madeline's life and how it was taken from them, sharing stories of her kindness, her hopes, and the dreams she would never fulfill. Whether Stefan ends up facing the death penalty or life in prison, it is clear that no sentence will bring Madeline back. The pain remains. People often mention that Kissimmee is a place known for tourists and vacations, but these awful events show that darkness can appear anywhere. Parents become more watchful. Some families decide to move, and others stay to try to support one another. Even those who never met Madeline might find themselves changed by the sadness of what she went through. Some hold on to the hope that new awareness could save someone else down the line, or that the community's response might be to take better care of its children. Time will tell how the trial ends and whether Stefan will face the death penalty or another sentence. But no matter what happens, Madeline's loss weighs heavily on all who hear about it. In the end, we are reminded that a 13-year-old girl, full of dreams and possibilities, was robbed of her future. Nothing in the legal system can undo that. The only real comfort is to keep her story alive as a warning and a call to be more vigilant, to speak up when something feels wrong, and to protect our children as best we can. We cannot change the past, but we can try to build a future where no child has to endure this kind of tragedy. By remembering Madeline, by learning from what happened, and by taking action when we sense danger, we show that her life was not forgotten. Though it is a small consolation, it might help us honor her in a world that desperately needs more compassion and care.